It's member-supported Hawaii Public Radio, and all things considered, I'm Dave Lawrence, and we are thrilled to have some gentlemen who are doing a run of dates at the Blue Note Hawaii through Saturday. It's the Corea Trio featuring Eddie Gomez on bass, Brian Blade on drums, Corea, of course, and real pleasure to have you guys in town. Thank you very much, Chick.
Yep, sure. Nice to be here.
And it's nice to have you here. And Brian, really nice to have you as well on board.
Thank you.
And Eddie?
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's always great to be in Hawaii.
Saying that, is there a particular Hawaii memory or experience that you've got in your background? You've been here before? What comes to mind?
Well, I have been here before, but it's been a while, so I don't have a really indelible memory of Hawaii, except that every time I came here, I always loved it. It was special. I'm from Puerto Rico, so it rings that resonating kind of island thing, and it's a good thing to ring. So it's nice to be here.
Brian, yourself, have you had any, sometimes it's the first time for people, other times people have friends, relatives, a cousin on Maui, whatever the case may be. How's your Hawaii connections?
My Hawaii connection is through my wife, who was born here, but this is my first time and our first time, and of course it came through Chick, which is, he has brought me into many things for the first time, so I'm so thankful to him and to enjoy this time with Eddie and him.
I can ask you about Hawaii, too, with your background. You have a particular memory that comes to mind?
Are you kidding? I came here and I rediscovered the Pink Hotel.
Ah, so the Royal Hawaiian.
Because my wife, Gail Moran Corea, and I, when we got officially married in the 80-something, but we always say our marriage date is 72, because that's when we came together. But we didn't get married till 85 or something like that. But for our honeymoon, we came here, and Gail loved the Pink Hotel. It's the Royal Hawaiian, I believe. Yeah, and we're staying now at the Outrigger, and out my balcony, I spotted it. I said, there it is. It's still there. So I took a photo of it, and I sent it to Gail, and she cried. So so we're going to come back at some point. I'm thrilled about that.
The Pink Palace, they call it. And what was the year that you said that?
I don't remember. I think 85, something like that,
One of the things that's important in talking to you guys is early music education, also just early education in general has emerged as an important thing as society progresses, if you will. People have learned the importance of how you indoctrinate people to music at a young age, the importance of having it in school to continue that. One of the things about you that makes you special, among a number of things, is that early music experience. Trumpet playing father. Can you talk a little bit about how at such a young age you were able to have that develop into playing the piano at just 4?
Well, first of all, that's something, this whole thing about how we came up in music is shared by the three of us, which is that we didn't go to music college. Like we came up through, I don't know, what do we call it? The ranks. The street. I mean, we discovered naturally discovered the value of playing with great musicians as a way to learn how to play music, because that's the way we did it. We always worked with each other. So when you mentioned schools, I just didn't want to get off on the wrong foot, because it wasn't music schools that brought us to where we are.
Yeah, I think more when I think of education, that's why I mentioned your father. And when you're that young, it's also education can come from just exposure to people. It doesn't have to be in a formal environment.
Yeah, exactly. It's education in a sense, but it's just life and getting involved in what you love. And my dad was a trumpet player and a band leader, and he introduced me to music. My mother was a hardworking lady, and she when I was 4 years old, she spent $45. That's what I was told. This is what I was told, to get this huge upright piano that needed to be lifted with a crane into our 3rd floor apartment that we lived in. So I got started early, like by my dad.
Chelsea, Mass, just outside of Boston.
Chelsea, yeah. Red Devils. That's the football team.
Yeah, I went to Emerson, so I have that right in the same general area. And the early music thing, as Chick was talking, and I think Eddie about 11 years old, the double bass, but then there's this early entrance into high school from at least reading your online biography. That's something that not a lot of people can say in terms of the development of music, and that obviously, sort of what Chick was saying, it goes earlier than a formal education that would lead to something like that happening.
Well, I went into high school really. There was no prodigious entry into high school. It just followed that I did a full 4 years. But I wanted to say about this morning. Actually, I did a master class here at a private high school. I think it's private high school with a bunch of kids. I mean, they're high school age. So I believe in the educational process. It's all changed now from when we were growing up. The only thing I'd have to say and add to what Chick said is that I'm glad I did go to Juilliard, and I spent 3 years. I had a wonderful teacher. That's really why I went to Juilliard, for my teacher. I had a wonderful mentor. Yeah, if you don't have a mentor in a school, in any school, then it's kind of it can be worthless. But I'm glad I went because it broadened my scope to a lot of different wonderful music. And I must say, the way Chick writes music, if it wasn't for that skill and craft, I wouldn't be able to play a lot of his music. I mean, it takes, I think, someone that has been through some schooling, I don't think you can just pick it up by yourself, all the things. Chick writes very wonderful music, but it involves having a skill. So I'm glad I went to school, but it was very specific. It was my teacher, and I played in some orchestras that were nice. But yeah, also, schools can be a waste of time if you don't know exactly what you want to do.
My guy at Juilliard, my mentor at Juilliard, I mean, I lasted 1 month on the regular program, but Peter Schickley was Peter Schickley, who later after that was P.D.Q. Bach. You know that he was the comedian, but he was an amazing musician. So he came in as a substitute teacher for a couple of weeks, and that was my favorite. That was my best memory at Juilliard. Aside from Eddie and I met at Juilliard.
Right, and that's a transcending thing, and we'll touch base a little bit more on some of that. But thinking about Brian, when they mentioned these Chick mentioned learning not just in a formal way, but from people and learning from each other, really. And Eddie mentioned the mentorship aspect of that, too. When you think about yourself and how it would fit into the development and maybe the just early passion to want to play on the drums, talk about where that developed.
Yeah, it was, my family as well. My father, who's a pastor, but also a great singer and loves music. And he and my mother, but my brother is also a musician, a drummer, 5 years older than me. So I sort of followed his lead and started playing drums in church. So it was a very communal inclusiveness that that was immediately connected to music. It had a place and a praise. So I always took that to the nightclub or to a bar or to a dive. It didn't matter. It was still the same connection for me.
And that's a great thing also because there's so much of a real spiritual nature in music, and the way that people who don't even necessarily identify themselves as being spiritual can find such a release, or can maybe in tough moments in their life find something in music that can bring them through those moments. So there's no doubt that church environment can be very nurturing. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things, maybe a crucial experience along the way there that helped transition towards the nightclubs?
Well, it was, that kind of connects to my teacher in school, a man named Dorsey Summerfield Jr. He's a saxophonist. He toured a bit with Ray Charles, but he was teaching at what was a new program called the Magnet School. It was developed in '83. My brother was in the first class of these schools in Louisiana, where we're from. So he had a professional band, of men, when we were teenagers, and he let us play with him. He let us go out on gigs. He gave us that real experience. And, play the hi-hat, the grooving happening, it's just like very, like people were dancing. So that was a privilege to have that experience in high school, as well as playing in big band and, Horace Silver charts and trying to learn about it, but then to have it be very real to someone's life outside of an institution.
Talking about that, people giving you the opportunity for an experience. One of your earliest is Cab Calloway, and there's the whole, you talk about people opening the door for you, sort of what you were saying earlier about the value of folks giving an informal education, which turns to be just as important as a more formal one. Explain for folks how something like that emerged in your life and at that, what was still a very early age.
Well, it was just a natural thing from one thing to another. I mean, once I discovered that the most interesting, fun thing about my daily life was music, I just kept doing it. I just kept finding friends who were into music, musicians who were into music. Out of Chelsea, I started going when I was in ninth grade, started going to Boston more, started meeting musicians older than me in Boston, and connecting up. And my whole life has been that way. My connection is and my team and I consider that my group is musicians. So it's just one thing after another. Like, for instance, this trio is, even though I've known Brian and played with Brian in a lot of great situations, and I've known Eddie even longer, since '59. We've made a lot of music together. This is a whole new experience now, because as a trio, we've never played together before. So again, I'm discovering, like, wow, it's a challenge. How do we do this and so forth? It's a rich and adventurous life that way.
Early life. By 18, Lionel Hampton, cats who just opened doors when we talk about that, and certainly, as Chick was saying, it continues to be a fabric that you include new folks in as they emerge in your life. When you're at that kind of age and you look back at it, what are some of the formative lessons that were picked up then that you're still applying today?
Well, at 18, really much not unlike at 16 or 14 or even 20 or later, I was just an open book. I mean, I was ready to take in experience and information and just kind of follow my nose and my heart, and things just happened. Just like meeting Chick when I was 16, or playing with Benny Goodman, Lionel Hampton, and Bobby Hackett, or playing finally winding up with Bill Evans. At 21, I was playing with Jerry Mulligan's small group, and that led to Bill. And then, then I stayed with Bill for 11 years because it was like, I found a place, a dream. I just landed. I landed in the middle of a dream. And so it was sort of like my life has sort of been that way. I just sort of kept going. And when I found something really good, I kind of stayed with it for a while.
The gig with Jerry, it's kind of interesting because it was a Village Vanguard, right? And it's a moment that was pivotal in your life. Share with folks how that happened. It's a double bill. You're there for a run of dates, and you get to meet Bill. Explain.
Well, back in the day, the Village Vanguard, there were two groups. Nowadays, it's one. And so I was with Jerry's small group, and the other band was Bill Evans' Trio. And I was, of course, really... I was besides myself, thinking that Bill was out there listening, and I was thrilled to be be with Jerry. But at some point, Bill's manager, Helen Keane, came up to me and said, "Bill would like to say hello to you." And I said, "Wow!" So I went over, and he was very generous, very kind, and had a cigarette and had a very Bill had a nasally kind of voice, and he very graciously said very nice things about me, and I thought. This is what I'll take with me for the rest of my life, that Bill Evans said kind words to me. And anyway, so about a month later, he called. And it's funny because I was doing all kinds of things. Again, we all did things to get from A to B to C, and to work. I was working actually at the Copacabana with Bobby Darin. He had hired me. And so I was with Bobby Darin. And then in the middle of that first week he had hired me to do, Bill called, and so Bill, and asked me to go on tour. So I said, yeah, And so I had to knock on Bobby's door and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Darren, I quit." Kind of thing. And he was very gracious. He said, "Great, go for it. Congratulations." He was very nice. Yeah. So that's how, again, it's how life is.
These are musical transitions, Brian, that I'm hearing these guys talk about. That where you're in one place and somebody else comes along, and kind of like that, where you end up having to say, "Hey, I gotta move on because I have this opportunity." Can you point to a place in your life that has a similar resonance?
It was maybe moving from my hometown of Shreveport, 6 hours south to New Orleans to go and study at university. And I wasn't studying music, but I met my mentors when I was there, and they took me in and helped me and gave me those opportunities. And I had to learn a lesson the hard way about playing in a hotel, a lobby. Well, it was a great musician, a man named George French, singer, bassist, and Emile Vinette, pianist. And they played everything that any request, Fats Domino, Thelonious Monk, anybody asked for anything by anyone, they could do it and make it happen. And I thought I needed to be downtown playing modern jazz, I thought. But I wasn't ready for that. I needed to be where they were with what they were teaching me, and it took me to another level of understanding. And anyway, one night I told George I couldn't make the gig because my other mentor, Ellis Marsalis, asked me to sub for my teacher at the time, David Lee Jr., great drummer. So I told George that I couldn't make it that night, and George came down to where I was playing after he was finished at the hotel, and then he fired me the next night. And it hurt my heart, man. I mean, it truly did. I was like, so I had to learn that lesson. It's like, no, I needed to say no. I have a commitment already. So, but it was an understanding too, and I grew from that. I'm so thankful that it happened.
And a lot of lessons are kind of like that. They have both ups and downs in them, or hard parts to them. They're not always so easy. Sometimes having a mentor or a band leader that you're working for can maybe be difficult, but at the same time, extraordinarily nurturing, or leave behind a legacy of work. I'm thinking about Miles. Obviously, it wouldn't be right to not include him in the conversation with you. Talk about, you had developed a lot of things. By the time that emerged in your life, you were well on your way. But it happened, and if you can paint a little picture for us of how it emerged, how you got the gig, and now that you're looking back on it, we're talking about lessons and things that we picked up from people along the way. No doubt there are some in that chapter of your life.
Well, I had the same experience these guys had, joining Miles, because Miles was the dream gig at that time, and I had followed Miles since I first heard him play. It must have been 1949. My dad had recordings, vinyl recordings, and Miles was playing as a young man with Bird's band with Charlie Parker. And I first heard him there, and I fell in love with his sound and his phrasing, and so every solo recording that Miles made, starting from the first one in 1951 called Dig, all the way through just every one, I was just there. I followed him. So by the time the call came to go play with him, it was pretty exciting. But I had a similar experience because I was working with Sarah Vaughan, who was another hero of mine, and I got the call to go to work with Miles, and it was tearing with me because I didn't want to miss it. So I went ahead and I scurried. I got on the phone and I found out that Bob James had been playing piano for Sarah Vaughan, and I knew that he had just left the gig and I had just taken his place. So he knew the repertoire. He knew Sarah's repertoire, and there was a gig coming up. I didn't want to let her down, and I begged him on the phone to please at least do a couple of weeks, and he was reluctant because he had already started off on a new thing, but he was kind enough to do it. He made it work for me. I told him how important it was for me. So then I went and I appeared in Baltimore, this club in Baltimore, and my first night with Miles. It was an amazing memory.
Are some of those shows nowadays through, I was talking with your manager earlier in the program, or before we got on the interview portion of this when we arrived, just about how YouTube has really changed things in the world. And one of the positive things that it's brought is there's so many concerts now that people can take a look at online and experience. And some of those are things that weren't officially released. You did a bunch of things that were released with Miles, but things like thinking about Isle of Wight, when I think about Tanglewood, maybe 1970. You look back at that stuff. Are there particular lessons you can point to about what it was like working with that kind of band leader in those situations, maybe his demands, expectations for the crew?
Well, like I told you about all the years that I was following and looking up to Miles and learning from the musicians that he chose. Like there was a whole line of piano players that played with Miles that were all of them my heroes. So by the time I got to play with him, you know, every night I was with him about 2 years, 2.5 years, and every night, every time we were together was a special moment for me. Even after that, after I left the band, every time I'd meet him, it was always special being around Miles, because he sort of was the, I don't know how to explain it, he was the beacon for us of musical freedom and of musical certainty. Like one of the things I loved about watching how he worked is he never like thought about asking for a license to do whatever he did. He was never looking to have someone let him do it. He would just did it, you know, whether it pleased certain groups of people or not. You know, he lost some audience, then he gained some audience, kept changing. And that freedom of creating. And the other thing that was amazing about him that I already loved to do and that really got solid in that band is the group, the feeling of working in a group. Like Miles really just, he wanted the musicians that worked with him to think for themselves and be free, and not, he never gave any directions ever. We never rehearsed. Occasionally he'd say something, and then it would take weeks to figure out what he meant.
Well, that's one of the things about bands there's a lot of special exploration, and you've got a great trio here, Chick Corea, and the trio that features Eddie Gomez, Brian Blades. It's going to be here at the Blue Note. It's been a pleasure getting to talk with you guys, and thank you for taking some time ahead of the show. Great to see you, Brian.
Thank you so much.
And see you.
It's fun, great interview.
Well, it's a lot of fun. Thank you, and Chick, God bless, and great having you on board.
We appreciate it. Yeah, thanks a lot, man.